everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of Shri Ram's IAS. We are starting off with a new series that is Polity in 15 minutes, and in today's session I'll be talking about the historical evolution of the constitutional framework that we have in India. Alright, तो किस तरीके से हमारे संविधान का निर्माण हुआ उसके बारे में हम बात करेंगे आज के इस पॉलिटी सेशन में in next 15 minutes. And when we talk about the constitutional evolution, there are two phases. The first phase is the Company's Rule, that is East India Company's Rule, and the second phase is where we have the Crown's Rule. So in today's session, I'll be guiding you throughout the complete evolution of the constitutional framework from 1773 to 1853. That is the Company's Rule that was there. And we'll be talking about the complete transformation of the constitutional framework that happened during this period of time. And it is very important. क्यों ज़रूरी है? इसलिए क्योंकि if we know about the constitutional evolution, because this complete evolution right from the 1773 act of the regulating act that came in 1773 that shaped the future of India, and the present constitution is basically based upon the various facts, the various provisions that were brought in these different acts. Now, after today's session, what you will be going through and what you will be learning through, all right, after the session ends, you will be able to comprehend all these things. That is the parliamentary oversight, why the British Parliament, it started regulating the East India Company's set up in India. All right, so what was the need? क्या ज़रूरत थी ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी को रेगुलेट करने की, ये आपको पता चलेगा. साथ ही साथ you will know about the key provisions of all the regulating and the charter acts that were brought in India in this period of time. Along with this, you will also see the evolution of the central administrative system that we have. All right, afterwards, you will understand that how the complete centralization was done and how the complete administrative transformation took place during the British rule in India. All right, apart from this, you will be able to understand the shapes, the acts, all right, these different acts, how they shaped the country's future constitution that had to be developed after the after the independence. So these all things you will be able to comprehend after the end of this session. All right, now when we talk about the first act, all right, so the first act was, or that was brought, was Regulating Act of 1773. Now, what was the need for this regulation? Why this Regulating Act was, or it came into being? The first and the foremost important thing was, it was during this period of time. What happened was that the people who were there, they were working with the East India Company. So they were getting rich day by day. But at the same time, the company, it went and it tried to take a loan, and the company's balance sheet was going in losses. तो एक तरफ तो क्या हो रहा था कि जहां पर जो कंपनी में लोग थे वो अमीर होते जा रहे थे, लेकिन वहीं पर ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी जो है वो लॉस में जा रही थी. नाउ दिस वाज द मेजर फैक्टर दैट वाज रिक्वायर्ड व्हाई दिस रेगुलेशन वाज नीडेड. सो अल्टीमेटली वी नो दैट देयर वाज बैटल ऑफ प्लासी, बैटल ऑफ बक्सर, और उसके बाद द कंपनी हैड गेन्ड द एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कंट्रोल, द कंपनी हैड gained the complete political control of this region. All right, this complete region was now in the control of the company. But at the same time, there were certain challenges that the East India Company was facing. All right, the first thing is there was a dual role crisis. Now, the company, East India Company, which started as a trading company, it is changing, or it was changing its character from a trading company towards a administrative and a political entity. All right. The second thing was there was administrative corruption. There was rampant misrule, as well as there were corruption among the officials. Like I said, that the officials, they were getting rich day by day, and at the same time, what was happening was that the company was going into the losses. And also, the another thing was that there was parliamentary pressure that was growing on the East India Company. The parliamentary pressure was there to regulate the mechanism how the East India Company is operating in India, and that all led to the formation of the first step or the first act that came, that is the Regulating Act of 1773. Now, it is very important question that you have to ask why this is called as the beginning of the parliamentary control. Because before this act, the control of East India Company was totally in the hands of the officials of the company. और जैसे ही ये एक्ट लाया गया, the complete control, all right, slowly and slowly, not exactly at the onset of this act, but slowly and slowly the parliament began controlling the operations of company in India, and that is why it is called as Regulating Act of 1773. Now, when we talk about the various features or the provisions of this Regulating Act of 1773, the most prominent feature is that it made the Governor General of Bengal. All right, the Governor of Bengal was designated as the Governor General of Bengal, and the first such Governor General of Bengal was Warren Hastings, who was at that point of time, he was also the Governor of Bengal. The next is that there was a 4-member executive council that was established. 4 members executive council established to assist the Governor General, and the decision was by majority vote. Again, very important thing to note over here, that the decision was by majority vote. So there were 4-member executive council, and even if the Governor General did not want to, all right, and the other members want to do something, so the voice of the Governor General will not be heard. All right, and then there was the Governor of Bombay and Madras Presidency that was at that point of time. They were subordinated to Bengal, and it was the first step towards the centralization in India as well. All right, as well as along with these features that were introduced by the Act of the 1773, there was a Supreme Court that was established in Kolkata, but over here the jurisdiction was only over the British subjects. And also when we talk about the corruption measures, so there were anti-corruption measures that were taken, and the company officials, they were barred, or they were they were told that they will not accept any kind of gifts, and they will not be involved in any kind of the private trade. All right, now what are the significance and limitation of this act? The first and the foremost significance over here is that it led to the central administration, all right, and it marked the beginning of the centralized tendency or administration in India. The next important thing is that it led to the judicial foundation, where we have the we had the judiciary, or we can say that the Supreme Court was established. However, it was not completely Supreme Court in total senses. All right, and then there was a parliamentary control even that was held. All right, it led to the first time recognition of the parliament's control over the East India companies, the operations that were there in India. Along with this, there were certain limitations. Like I said, there was unclear authority. There was no clear division of the powers that were laid down between the governor and the Governor General and his council, and ultimately that led to the feuds between the council and the Governor General. All right, there were jurisdictional conflicts between the Supreme Court and the Governor General's Council as well, and there was implementation challenges because there were no clear, the rules or no clear procedures that were laid down for the administrative disputes, and that led to the implementation challenges. Now, for this, all these different challenges that were there, came the Dual Government Act, or it is also called as the Pitt's India Act in 1784. All right, now when we are talking about Pitt's India Act, it established again a revolutionary system that defined, or that would define, Britain and India's relation for the decades to come in the future. All right, now what was the purpose? The major purpose was over here the difference, or I told you that the decision in the Governor General's Council was taken by the majority. So for this particular purpose, this Dual Government Act or Pitt's India Act came into being. Now it came in 1784, and what are the different things that were led or that were implemented by Pitt's India Act of 1784? There was a board of control that was created. All right, this board of control that was created, it was in Britain. And this has to supervise all the political, military and the revenue matters of the company. So this was a board of control. Again, a more centralization tendency was it was implemented. Then there was commercial autonomy. All right, there was company's court of directors, they were retained, and these court of directors, they had the control over the commercial function. Now, like I said, this was a dual control, or this act limit, it is also called as Dual Control Act. Why? Because there were two controls that were established. The first control was over here, where we have the Board of Control that was established, and the second control was in the hands of the Court of Directors. All right. Then the Governor General's authority over Bombay and Madras, that was also reinforced and it was also strengthened. That means more centralizing tendencies were there in this act, and also there was territorial recognition, and also one more important thing was that the Governor General was given the veto rights over the decisions of the Governor General's Council. Now, what was the impact of this Pet-Santia Act? It led to the dual control system. All right, there was further centralization that happened, and also it led to the groundwork for the direct British political and colonial state autonomy, or the British Parliament, the control. It strengthened further because of this particular act. All right, so that is why this act is very, very important. Now, you can understand and you can remember 1773 started the control, but when we are talking about 1784, it perfected that control or the regulation that the British Parliament wanted to have. Now, afterwards, when we talk about the East India Company, the East India Company was basically a trading entity, a trading company. Now, what happened over here was that there was a transition to the different charter acts. There were era of charter acts. The charter was for 20 years, where the company was granted the right to trade in India. Now, when we are talking about the charter acts, there are important charter acts which started from 1793. All right, we have 1793 Charter Act, then we have the Charter Act of 1813, 1833 and 1853. And after 1853, after 4 years, there was the first battle for the independence, or the first war of independence, that is, there was Sepoy Mutiny, and as well as when we talk about it. So afterwards, the complete control after 1857, afterwards there was Government of India Act 1858, and then the complete control was taken over by the Crown. Now over here, still the company, East India Company, was functioning as a commercial as well as a political entity in India, and the complete control, although the control was being strengthened and it was taken over by the British Parliament, but it still was under the British East India Company. Now, when the first 1793 Act came, there was a status quo that was maintained. Then in 1813, the trade monopoly, it was partially opened, because this was the time when we had the Industrial Revolution that was striking in the Britain. Then again, in 1833, the company lost all the trading monopoly, and later on in 1853, it became, or it transitioned, the complete East India Company, it transitioned to the bureaucratic governance system. So the first act, the Charter Act, is 1793, and it was passed when we had Lord Cornwallis, when he was there as a Governor General. Now, when we talk about the key provision, so over here the company's rule was extended for the another 20 years. All right. Along with this, it reaffirmed Governor General's supremacy over the Bengal as well over the Madras and Bombay presidencies. All right, there was a fixed salary for the company officials that was there, or that was fixed. The salary was fixed so that the corruption could be eliminated, and even along with this, the private gains can be eliminated when we are talking about the company officials. And also, it continued the trade monopoly of the company. All right. Now, when we talk about the next act that came in 1813, this is very important act, because over here, now what happened was the Industrial Revolution was, it was at the peak, and now there was search, there was demand for the new markets for the finished products, and ultimately the merchants and the other companies, the trading companies that were there in Britain, they were pressurizing the British system, the British government, that the monopoly of the East India Company should be restricted, it should be lifted, so that they can come into India and they can trade into India. Now, over here what happened was there was trade liberalization, and with this trade liberalization, what happened was the monopoly of the East India Company, it was lifted. Except for two things, that is trade with India with tea, alright. So, the East India Company could trade with India only for or only in tea. and also the trade with China. So except from these two things, all right, trade with India, except tea, the tea trade was still monopolized, or it was still in the monopoly of the East India Company, and along with this trade with China, the rest of the monopolies were ended for the East India Company. All right, there was also another important thing that happened during 1813 Charter Act, and that was that the missionaries, they were allowed to come into India. The religious Christian missionaries, they were allowed to operate into India, and they began coming to India at this point of time. And also over here, there was annual expenditure that was authorized for 1 lakh rupees for the educational purposes. So these were the important things that were brought by the 1813 Act of the Charter Act that was there. All right, so you can see that how this 1813 Act, the Charter Act, it changed the different political as well as the trade balances in India. All right, so what happened was, before 1813, there was complete East India Company's monopoly for the trade. But after 1813, the trade was opened for the British merchants except for tea, the tea trade with India as well as the trade with China. All right, then the missionaries were restricted before 1813, but later on, after 1813, the missionaries were allowed to operate in India, and there was no state involvement for the education before 1813 Charter Act, and later on, the state earmarked annual expenditure of 1 lakh rupees for the education purposes. And before this, before 1813, the East India Company was a company that was focused totally over the trade. But over here, sorry. Now, after 1813, what happened was, now the East India Company, it changed into more of towards the bureaucratic as well as the administrative role. So these are, or this is the significance of the Charter Act of 1830. The next act came after 20 years, the Charter Act of 1833. Now, it is very important because over here, there was the peak of industrial capitalism in Britain. All right, and the industrial capitalism had reached its zenith by this time. So what happened was, now the complete monopoly of the East India Company ended by this Charter Act of 1833. There was end of complete commercial activity, all the commercial operations and also the operations that were there, they were ended for the East India Company, and now the East India Company became a purely a political entity, a governance entity in India. Along with this, when we are talking about the lawmaking powers, they were concentrated in Governor General's Council, and that created the first central legislature in India, and that is, we had the legislative centralization that happened along with 1833 Act. And also there was a fourth member that was added to the Governor General's Council. He was a law member. And also when we are talking about over here, so India was formally recognized as a complete political entity, single unit for the governance purposes by the Act of 1833. Now, this is very, very important act when we are talking about the Charter Act of 1833, because it led to the establishment of the central legislature in India. All right, or it led to the foundation of the central legislature in India later on, which became the Parliament. All right. Along with this, there was All India Services that was started. There was a framework that was created for the unified civil services in India, and over here, up to this time, the civil services, they were restricted only to Britishers. All right, only to the British subjects that were there. They were, they were added to the civil services, and also because of there was a fourth member, Lord Macaulay, who was added as a law member to the Council of Governor General. So there was a legal codification, or we had the laws that became to be, they became to be integrated into a unified coding system, and there was a law commission that was established under Lord Macaulay, that was established in 1834. All right, so that is the significance of the Charter Act of 1833. And when we are talking about 1833, you can remember it with 3 C's, that is, we had the centralization, all right, we had the civil services, as well as codification of the laws that were done. Now, the last act that came under the company's rule is the Charter Act of 1853. Now, it is very important to note over here that over here also there were different, there was a growing demand for accountability, for the professional governance, and that led to the shaping of the next Charter Act of 1853. Now, over here, what happened was there was separation of power. There were distinguished legislative and executive functions within the Governor General's Council. So over here, they were separated. The legislative functions were separated, the executive functions were separated, and thus there was a different legislative branch that was created among the Governor General's Council. Along with this, there was the introduction of the open competition for the civil services. All right, this open system was based on the Lord Macaulay's recommendation, and it replaced the patronage with merit. Then there was Law Commission, it renewed, and the Law Commission, it continued with its legal codification and as well as the reform efforts, and also it extended the Companies Rule without giving any further time framework. Earlier, the time framework was for 20 years. All right, we have seen 1793, 1813, 1833, 1853. But over here, indefinite extension was provided to the East India Company. Now, this is very, very important because over here, the company's story ends, and when I'll be talking about in the next series or the next video, we'll be talking about the crown story that will begin. All right, so this is where the company's story ends, but over here, it was very significant when we talk about the Charter Act of 1853 because it led to the merit-based services where the competitive examination was introduced for the Indian civil services. Along with this, there was beginning of the legislative decentralization and specialization. Towards this end, we have seen that the centralization was more focused, all right, and decentralization was not focused. But over here, decentralization, it began over here, and also it was the last act that was passed under the Companies Rule before the starting of the Crown Rule. So over here you can see that this is the complete comparative analysis of the acts that were passed during the Companies Rule. When we are talking about the first regulation, it came under 1773 Act. Then there was dual control that was introduced in 1784. Then there was renewal of the Act or the Charter that happened in 1793. And afterwards in 1813, the missionaries and the education was focused upon. Then law member was added, and there was All India Civil Services that was introduced in 1833, and there was legislature split that happened in 1853. When we talk about the Governor General, we have different Governor Generals when we are talking about 1773 and 1784 Acts. So at this point of time, Warren Hastings was the Governor General. Later on, when 1793 Act came, Lord Cornwallis was the Governor General. Lord Hastings was the Governor General at the time of the passage of 1813 Act. And then we have Lord William Bentinck during the passage of 1833 Charter Act, and Lord Dalhousie, he was the Governor General when the Charter Act for 1853 came. Alright, along with this, you can see that the centralization, it started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and it continued strengthening towards the end of these different acts. There was monopoly that was there when we talk about the trade in the in the existing or in the initial phases, but later on that monopoly also it was done with, and there was free trade that was practiced as far as the British merchants are involved or they were concerned. All right. When we talk about the judicial impact, there was a Supreme Court that was established along with the 1773 Regulating Act, and there was codification. Legal codification began after the formation of the Law Commission under Lord Macaulay after the Act of 1833. So that is a comparative analysis of all these acts. Now over here, when we talk about the legacy of these acts, so these acts represents more than the colonial legislation, and they establish the institutional foundations for our constitution, all right, and that we endure even after the independence today as well. So when we talk about this, that established the principle for the legislative supremacy, and that is why that led to the establishment of parliamentary sovereignty in India. All right, it created the framework for centralized lawmaking body or centralized lawmaking the institution that is there, and led to the central legislature, formation of the central legislature. All right, it founded the merit-based bureaucracy that became the later on IS, for which you all are preparing. All right, and also it introduced the concepts for the legal uniformity and codified rule and laws that led to the establishment of rule of law in India. Along with this, also it initiated state involvement in education and knowledge system, leading to the education policy. So all these are the legacy of these all different acts that we have studied in today's session. We have studied 1773 Act of Regulating Act, where the parliamentary control began. Then 1784, where dual government was preferred. Then we have 1793, where we have the administrative stability that was, it was focused. Then trade and education reforms were focused in 1813 Charter Act. 1833 Charter Act led to the creation of the central legislature, and 1853 led to the merit-based civil services that is there. Now, when we talk about the mains and the prelims, so when we are talking about the prelims, what should be your strategy? All right. The first is that you have to focus on the key features and the first that were introduced in these acts. All right, because that had been asked in the examination regularly. Memorize the chronology. 1773 Regulating Act, then we have Pitt's India Act, then we have the Charter Acts. So you have to memorize these chronology. You have to remember distinctive provisions which are related to these different acts, and also you have to connect the acts to a broader historical context. All right, why there was a need or why there were changes that were being done in India as the Industrial Revolution was flourishing in the Britain. So that you have to connect. You have to connect those dots so that you can learn and you can remember these faster. All right. Now over here, when we talk about the mains question, over here you can see that we have one example. Discuss how the Charter Acts, right, from 1793 to 1853 prepared India's modern constitutional governance, evaluate their role in establishing administrative institutions that survived beyond colonial rule. So over here, when we are talking about the mains questions, so what you have to remember over here is that when you are approaching polity for mains, you have to have a broader understanding, and you have to see things in different perspective so that your answer could be much better than what we have or what you must have written up to now. All right, so that all things you have to remember when you are focusing for your civil services. That would be all in today's session. But before I go, do not forget to like and share this video, and also do not forget to subscribe the channel. All right, so that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care and Jai Hind. I'll meet with you in the next video series, and where we'll be discussing the Crown's rule and the different laws that were passed over there, the major provisions, as well as how that has impacted the constitutional evolution in India. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care and Jai Hind.